If you play Chopin, I will marry you.
Victoria Cole threw the words carelessly, like tossing a coin to a beggar, without even turning around. Her heels clicked across the marble floor of the empty ballroom at the Grand Central Hotel, cutting through the midnight silence. She didn't see the man in the blue janitor's uniform freeze by the grand piano, or how his hand, still holding a rag, slowly lowered. David Sullivan watched her walk away. His heart was pounding as if he were a 20-year-old conservatory student again, stepping onto the stage of the Metropolitan Opera House in New York for the very first time. "Deal," he said softly into the emptiness. Victoria turned, raised an eyebrow in surprise, smiled faintly, and disappeared through the door. Her laughter echoed down the hallway, a soft, mocking sound, like the rustle of dollar bills. David was left alone. Alone with the piano he hadn't dared to touch for 2 years. Alone with the memory of who he used to be. Alone with a hope that had flared in his chest for the first time in 5 years. He walked over to the instrument and ran his fingers along the keys. He didn't press them, just touched them. The blackwood felt cold and smooth, like a gravestone. But before we continue, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. It means a lot to us to know how far our stories reach. New York slept outside the windows. The summer night was warm and quiet, with only the occasional car passing along Fifth Avenue. The Grand Central Hotel stood in the very center, 5 stars, luxurious, unreachable for most people. Ministers, business magnates, and celebrities stayed there. Every chandelier cost more than David earned in a year. And here he mopped the floors. 2 years earlier, when Mr. Gregory Harris, the senior administrator of the hotel, had offered him the job, David had sworn to himself never to touch a piano again. Never to return to the past. The past had died with Anna and little Maggie on that icy road outside New York 5 years ago. It had died along with his career, his home, and the friends who turned away when he started drinking. But tonight something had broken inside him. Or maybe something had healed. David sat on the piano bench. His fingers trembled. He closed his eyes and allowed himself to remember the grand hall, the bright lights, the applause, Anna in the front row, her eyes filled with pride, little Maggie, only 4, clapping her hands and shouting, "Daddy, you're a magician." He had been a magician, he could make the piano sing until people cried. Then one icy road, one drunk truck driver, and the magic was gone. David opened his eyes. His reflection stared back from the polished piano lid, 38 years old, gray at the temples, deep lines around the eyes. A janitor. Invisible. A ghost. But Victoria had seen him tonight. Mockingly, yes. With disdain, yes. But she had seen him. He had been watching her for the past 6 months, how she walked through the lobby, straight-backed, cold, untouchable, how she spoke to her staff, sharp, without a smile, how she stepped into her black Mercedes and drove away without looking at the city outside. Victoria Cole, 35. Owner of the hotel. Heiress to her late father's construction empire. A woman who had everything, except warmth in her eyes. David saw her loneliness. He recognized it. It was like his own, only wrapped in expensive suits and cold words. He hadn't planned to fall in love. It just happened, quietly, hopelessly, the way a beggar might fall in love with a queen from a fairy tale. And tonight the queen had said, "Play Chopin, and I'll marry you." A joke. A mockery. A way to put an audacious janitor in his place for daring to hum beside her piano. But for David, it was like a breath of air to a drowning man. He stood, picked up the mop, and went back to work. But in his mind, Chopin's Nocturne was already playing, the same one he had performed at his last concert before the tragedy, the one his fingers still remembered even if his heart had tried to forget. Morning at the Grand Central Hotel began at 6. David finished his night shift but didn't go home. He sat in the staff room, drinking instant coffee from a plastic cup and staring at the wall. "David, why aren't you sleeping?" Laura, one of the maids, peeked in. 29, round-faced, kind eyes. She'd come from a small town outside the city 3 years earlier, saving for a small apartment. She worked tirelessly, always smiling, always finding time to help. And she was in love with him. He knew. She didn't hide it. "Can't sleep," he said quietly. Laura sat down beside him and set her cup on the table. "I heard what happened last night," she said. Mr. Harris told me he saw Victoria near the ballroom, and you were there. David stayed silent. David, she said gently, touching his hand, don't think about her. She's not for you. She's different. I know. He pulled his hand away, but not unkindly. I know, Laura. Then why? Her voice trembled with pain. Why do you look at her that way? I see it. Everyone sees it. David turned to her, looking into her honest, loyal eyes. Laura was a good woman. She deserved a man who would love her the way she deserved. But he couldn't be that man. Laura, you're a gem, David said softly. But I still wear Anna's ring on a chain. You understand? She nodded and looked away. I understand. But that was 5 years ago, David. 5 years. Anna would want you to live again. I am living, he said, finishing his coffee. In my own way. Laura sighed and stood up. All right. Go home, get some sleep. You have another shift tonight. David nodded. But when she left, he didn't go home. Instead, he went up to the 3rd floor, to Mr. Gregory Harris's office, and knocked. Come in, came the old man's voice. Mr. Harris sat at his desk, sorting through papers. 62 years old, gray-haired, intelligent eyes behind glasses. He had worked at the hotel since the day it opened 10 years ago. He still remembered Victoria's father, the founder of the place, and had seen the girl grow into a cold, calculating businesswoman. David, he said, removing his glasses and studying him carefully. Something happen? Mr. Harris, David sat across from him. Did you hear what Victoria said last night? The old man hesitated, then nodded. I did. I was walking by, heard voices. I stopped. Didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I heard. She said, play Chopin, and I'll marry you. She did, Mr. Harris confirmed. And you answered, deal. David leaned forward. You think she was joking? The old man slowly put his glasses back on. David, I've known you for 2 years. I know who you were. When you came to me, half alive, shaking from withdrawal, I saw something in your eyes I don't often see in wealthy people, dignity. You didn't ask for pity. You asked for a chance. And you gave it. I did. Because I knew you weren't broken. Bent, but not broken. Now listen to me carefully. Mr. Harris took off his glasses again and laid them on the desk. Victoria was joking. For her, it was mockery. A way to humiliate. She does that with everyone she sees as beneath her. But she said it. She did, he nodded. And I heard it. Which means she'll have a witness if you decide to remind her of that promise. David said nothing. You're going to play, Mr. Harris said. It wasn't a question. Yes. You know what'll happen? No. The old man sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. David, I've lived a long life. Let me tell you something, rich people don't like being forced to choose between their word and their comfort. Victoria might refuse. Publicly. And that'll hurt. I know. David stood. But I'll play anyway. Not for her. For me. I need to touch the keys again. Not at night, in an empty room, but in front of people. Like before. Mr. Harris looked at him for a long moment. All right? Then get ready. In a week, Victoria's engagement party with Oliver Martin takes place. Big event. The entire New York elite will be there. The pianist is supposed to be Ian Sanders, your former colleague, isn't he? David clenched his jaw. He took my spot at Juilliard after I fell. Then here's your chance. Mr. Harris opened a drawer and took out a key. This is for the ballroom. No one's there at night. Rehearse. Quietly. And if anyone asks, I know nothing. David took the key. Their fingers brushed. Thank you. Don't thank me, the old man said. I just want to see what happens when the Queen meets someone who's not afraid to tell her the truth. David left the office. The hallway smelled of fresh coffee and expensive perfume. Guests were beginning to wake up. Breakfast was already being served in the restaurant downstairs. He walked down the service stairs, past the kitchen. The chefs were already at work. Among them was Andrew Miller, 31, talented, ambitious. He cooked so well that guests extended their stays just to try his dishes again. Andrew noticed David and nodded. They weren't friends, but they greeted each other. David knew Andrew liked Laura. He'd seen the way the chef looked at her, with the same hopeless longing David himself felt for Victoria. The world was full of people who loved those they shouldn't. David left the hotel through the staff entrance. The summer morning was bright and warm. He walked through the streets of New York, the sun rising over the city, and thought of only one thing. In a week, he would sit at the piano and play Chopin. And then, whatever fate decided. The next few days passed in a haze. By day, David worked, mopping floors, cleaning rooms, taking out the trash. He smiled at guests, nodded to his supervisors, invisible in his blue uniform. But at night, when the hotel fell asleep, he would unlock the ballroom with Mr. Harris's key and sit at the piano. The first night, he just sat there, staring at the keys. His hands trembled. 5 years. 5 years since he had really played. All that time, he had only hummed melodies quietly, thinking no one could hear. But now it was time. He placed his fingers on the keys. Pressed down. The sound filled the room, pure, deep, alive. David closed his eyes and began to play. Chopin's Nocturne, Opus 9, No. 2. The same piece he had performed at his last concert. His fingers remembered every note, every transition, every breath of the music. He played, and tears streamed down his face. He played, and saw Anna sitting in the front row. He played, and heard Maggie's laughter. He played, and said goodbye to the past, finally, truly. When the last note faded, he sat motionless. Then he wiped his face with his sleeve and looked at his hands. They weren't trembling anymore. "Thank you," he whispered. He didn't know to whom, Anna, Maggie, the music, God, or himself. From the second night on, it became easier. He practiced for 3 hours each night, perfecting every phrase, every nuance. The piano was once again an extension of him, his voice, his soul. On the third night, Laura appeared. David didn't hear her come in. Only when he finished playing and opened his eyes did he see her, standing by the door, one hand over her lips, tears shining on her cheeks. "David," she whispered. I didn't know you could play like that. I knew you were a pianist, but this is magic." He stood and awkwardly wiped his hands on his pants. "Laura, don't tell anyone. Please." She stepped closer and looked him in the eyes. "You're really going to do it? At her engagement? In front of everyone?" "Yes." "David, she'll break your heart. She won't marry you. She's not that kind of woman." "I know." He sat back down on the piano bench. "But it doesn't matter anymore. I'm not playing for her. I'm playing for myself, to prove that I'm still alive. That I'm not just a ghost in a janitor's uniform." Laura sat beside him in silence for a moment, then asked quietly, "And if she actually says yes? If she agrees to marry you?" David smiled faintly. "Then I'll tell her I changed my mind. Because I don't need a wife out of pity." "But you love her." He didn't answer. Because he couldn't lie to Laura. She saw the truth. "David," she said, taking his hand, "I won't talk about my feelings anymore. I know you're not ready. But promise me one thing, when all this is over, when you find yourself again, give yourself a chance to be happy. Not with her. Not with ghosts of the past. But with someone who'll love you for who you really are." He squeezed her hand. "I promise. Someday." Laura nodded and stood up. "Then I'll help you. I'll make sure no one interrupts you. I'll bring you coffee. I'll be here if you need me." "Thank you, Laura. You're real." She smiled through her tears. "I know. It's just a shame you're realizing it only now." And she left him alone, with the piano and his thoughts. Meanwhile, upstairs in her luxurious apartment, Victoria couldn't sleep. She stood by the window, gazing at the night skyline of New York. The city glimmered with lights, a warm summer breeze touched her face through the open window, but she still felt cold. Inside. Always cold. A week until the engagement. 3 months until the wedding with Oliver Martin, a calculated union that would merge two of New York's biggest construction empires. Oliver would gain access to her late father's network. She would secure financial stability for her upcoming projects. Love? Victoria smirked at her reflection in the glass. Love was for naive women in romantic movies. In the real world, there were deals, contracts, and profit. Although once, she had believed in love. 5 years ago, she'd had a fiancé, Michael. They'd met in college. He was an architect who dreamed of designing beautiful buildings. Victoria had been planning the wedding, picking out her dress, believing in a bright future. But a month before the ceremony, Michael had died of a sudden heart attack. He was only 30. The doctors said it was a congenital condition no one had detected. He simply didn't wake up one morning. After his death, Victoria had made a decision, never to love again. Never to depend on anyone. Love made you weak, and weakness in business meant death. Oliver was the perfect partner. Handsome, successful, cynical. They understood each other without words. Both knew exactly why they were getting married. No illusions. No promises of fidelity. Just a contract written on elegant paper. Victoria remembered the janitor, how he'd stood by the piano a few nights ago. She'd been walking past the ballroom when she heard someone softly humming. She looked in and saw him, tall, lean, in a wrinkled uniform, his hand brushing the keys as if saying goodbye to a lover. Something about that sight had irritated her. Maybe it was the tenderness in the way he looked at the instrument. Maybe it was the life in his eyes, the kind she no longer had in hers. And so she'd thrown out that line, just to put him back in his place. To remind him who he was. Play Chopin, and I'll marry you. A foolish joke. She hadn't thought for a second he'd take it seriously. But he had looked straight into her eyes and said, "Deal." And there had been something in that look that unsettled her. Not fear. Not hope. But a quiet confidence, as if he knew something she didn't. Victoria stepped away from the window and lay down in bed. The silk sheets were cool. Expensive. Empty. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but the melody the janitor had hummed kept echoing in her head, Chopin's Nocturne. Sad. Beautiful. Alive. How long had it been since she'd heard real music? Oliver Martin sat in the bar of the Grand Central Hotel, drinking whiskey. It was 11 p.m. The bar was nearly empty, just him and the bartender, who politely pretended not to notice how much he had drunk. Oliver was drunk, not completely, but enough for the anger he usually hid beneath the mask of a successful businessman to rise to the surface. He hated this hotel. Hated the polite staff. Hated the air of fake luxury. But he tolerated it, because it belonged to his future wife. Which meant soon it would be his. Victoria. The cold woman who never smiled. Who looked at him like he was just another item on a business checklist. Fine. He looked at her the same way. But there were things she didn't know, and shouldn't know until after the wedding. For instance, that for the past 6 months, he'd been secretly seeing her best friend, Christina Bell. Behind Victoria's back. In the very rooms of this hotel, when Victoria was away on business. Oliver smirked into his glass. Christina was the complete opposite of Victoria, passionate, fiery, willing to do anything for money and status. She dreamed of taking Victoria's place. And Oliver had hinted that someday, she would. First the wedding. Then a couple of years of appearances. Then divorce. And Christina would wait. Patiently. Like a proper mistress should. The plan was perfect, except for one thing. Oliver was beginning to suspect he wasn't the only one playing a game. Yesterday, he'd noticed Mr. Gregory Harris, the old administrator, watching him with an odd expression, long, assessing, as if he knew something. Oliver finished his whiskey and slammed the glass on the counter. Another. The bartender silently poured. "Tell me," Oliver squinted, "how long have you worked here?" 5 years, Mr. Martin." "Seen a lot, huh?" "It's part of the job, to see and keep quiet." "Smart man," Oliver nodded. "And if I give you $200, will you tell me what you know about Miss Cole?" The bartender's face didn't change. "Mr. Martin, I know nothing, and $200 won't change that." Oliver laughed. "That's why I hate this hotel. Everyone here thinks they're saints." He stood, swaying slightly, then straightened up. He tossed a bill onto the counter. "Keep the change." And he staggered out of the bar. When he was gone, Christina Bell stepped out from behind a column. She had seen the whole scene. Taking Oliver's seat, she smiled at the bartender. "Bring me a glass of red wine. The most expensive one you have." The bartender nodded and poured. Christina drank slowly, savoring it. Enjoying the moment. 1 week until the engagement. That meant she'd be close, organizing, supervising, smiling at Victoria by day, and kissing her fiancé in the dark hotel corridors by night. Life was beautiful. Finishing her wine, Christina stood, smoothed her dress, and glanced at her reflection in the mirror behind the bar. Soon. Very soon, everything would change. She would step out of the shadows, take her place beside Oliver, and Victoria would be left with nothing. Christina smirked and walked out. Her heels clicked on the marble floor like the countdown to the inevitable. 5 days passed. 2 days left before the engagement. David practiced every night. Chopin's nocturne filled his head constantly, when he mopped floors, when he cleaned rooms, when he tried to sleep during the day. The music lived in him, demanded release, gave him no peace. Laura truly helped. She brought him coffee, made sure no one came down to the ballroom at night. Sometimes she just sat in the corner and listened, saying nothing. Just being there. And today, on the 6th night, when David stepped out of the ballroom after another rehearsal, Mr. Harris was waiting by the door. The old man silently handed him an envelope. "What's this?" David asked. "Open it," Mr. Harris replied. David tore it open. Inside was an old photograph. He recognized himself immediately, 10 years ago, on stage at the Metropolitan Opera House. Young, in a tuxedo, at the piano. His eyes bright. His hands flying over the keys. And in the front row, among the audience, a woman. David looked closer. He recognized her. Mrs. Helen Cole, Victoria's mother. That was her 50th birthday, Mr. Harris said quietly. 10 years ago. Her husband arranged a private concert. You played. She still remembers. David stared at the photograph, stunned. I don't remember. You played hundreds of concerts back then. But she remembers. Do you know why? Mr. Harris paused. Because that night you played so beautifully, she cried, for the first time in years. Her husband, old Mr. Cole, told me afterward, that pianist made my wife cry. That means he's real. David slowly lowered the photograph. Why are you showing me this? So you understand, Mr. Harris said quietly, you're not playing for Victoria. You're playing for those who can truly listen. Mrs. Helen Cole will be at the engagement. She'll remember. She'll recognize you. And what will that change? Mr. Harris smiled faintly. Mrs. Cole is against this marriage. She believes Oliver Martin isn't the right man for her daughter. But Victoria doesn't listen. Still, if anyone can reach her, it's her mother. David handed the photograph back. I don't want to use anyone. I don't want schemes. This isn't a scheme, Mr. Harris said, slipping the photo back into the envelope. It's just information. What you do with it, that's up to you. He turned to leave but paused. By the way, David. You know that Ian Sanders called yesterday? He's backing out of playing at the engagement. Said he's sick. But I saw him 2 days ago at the restaurant, drunk. My guess is, he's just not in shape to perform. David frowned. So who's going to play? Miss Cole is looking for a replacement. But finding a good pianist on short notice in New York isn't easy. Everyone's either booked or too expensive. So there might be no music at all? Quite possible, Mr. Harris said, meeting his eyes. But you know what to do. And he walked away, leaving David standing in confusion. That afternoon, David couldn't sleep. He lay in his small rented room on the outskirts of the city, staring at the ceiling, thinking. Ian had cancelled. Which meant the piano would stand silent. No one would play. Which meant David could simply offer to take his place. But then it would look like he had planned it. Like he was taking advantage of the situation. Then again, what did it matter? Victoria would never take him seriously anyway. She would refuse. Mock him. Humiliate him. But he would still play. That was all that mattered. David got up and went to the window. Outside, New York was alive. The summer sun shone on the streets, children played in the parks, cars passed by. Life went on, for everyone. For him too. He opened the drawer of his small desk and took out a little box. Inside was Anna's wedding ring, simple, gold. He had worn it on a chain under his shirt for 5 years. David placed the ring on his palm. Anna, he whispered, if you can hear me somehow, tell me, am I doing the right thing? Or have I lost my mind? The ring was silent. But something inside him clicked into place. The decision came naturally. He would put the ring away. Not throw it out, never. But tuck it into the box, leave it there. Because it was time to move on. Anna would have wanted him to live. And for the last 5 years, he had only existed. David took the chain from his neck, gently placed the ring in the box, closed the lid, and slid it back into the drawer. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I'll always love you. But I have to try to breathe again." And for the first time in 5 years, he fell asleep without that weight on his chest. Meanwhile, chaos reigned at the Grand Central Hotel. Victoria Cole sat in her office, staring coldly at Christina Bell. "Did you find a pianist or not?" Christina nervously fidgeted with her tablet. "Victoria, I called everyone. They're all booked, or asking for so much money we might as well cancel the music altogether." "Cancel?" Victoria's voice was quiet. Dangerously quiet. "Are you telling me there will be no music at my engagement? I've done everything I could." Christina protested. Then it wasn't enough. Victoria rose and walked to the window. "In 2 days, I'll be hosting 200 guests. The New York elite. Journalists. And you're telling me the piano will just sit there in silence?" Christina said nothing. Inside, she was boiling. She hated moments like this, when Victoria looked at her like a servant. Just a little longer, she told herself. Soon, everything would change. "There's one option," Christina said cautiously. "What option?" "One of your employees? I heard he can play. Mr. Harris mentioned it." Victoria turned. "Who?" "The janitor. David Sullivan," Christina said. Silence. Victoria stared at her as if she'd just suggested hiring a street busker. "The janitor," Victoria repeated. "Yes. They say he used to be a pianist. A well-known one. But something happened, and he—" "Enough," Victoria raised her hand. "You're suggesting that at my engagement to Oliver Martin, I let a man who mops my hotel floor sit at the piano? But if he can," Christina began. "Get out of my office!" Victoria shouted. Christina flinched, grabbed her tablet, and rushed out. Victoria sat back down, resting her head on her hands. The janitor. The one who had been humming by the piano. The one to whom she had jokingly said that line. "Play Chopin, and I'll marry you." She remembered his look. Deal. Could he really have believed she meant it? Victoria raised her head and glanced at the door. What if? No. That was madness. She couldn't. Her reputation, what would people say? But on the other hand, she had no choice. No pianist. No time. And a janitor who, according to rumors, could play. Maybe fate was mocking her. Victoria picked up the phone and dialed the internal number. "Mr. Harris? Come to my office. Immediately." 5 minutes later, the old administrator entered. Victoria sat behind her desk, back straight, face composed, but Mr. Harris saw the uncertainty in her eyes. "I'm listening, Ms. Cole." "Christina says one of our employees, the janitor, supposedly can play the piano." "David Sullivan," Mr. Harris nodded. "Yes, he can." "How do you know?" Victoria asked. "I hired him 2 years ago. I know his past." Victoria leaned forward. "What past?" Mr. Harris was silent for a moment before speaking. 10 years ago, David Sullivan was one of the best pianists in the country. Played at the Metropolitan Opera House. Taught at Juilliard. Performed at international festivals. Then tragedy struck. He lost his family, his wife and daughter, in a car accident. Couldn't cope. Started drinking. Lost his job, his reputation, his home. 2 years ago, he came to me asking for any job. I gave him one, as a janitor. Victoria said nothing, processing the information. "And he can really play at the engagement?" "He can, if you ask him," Mr. Harris replied. "Ask him?" Victoria smirked. "I employ him. I pay his salary. I don't ask. I give orders." Mr. Harris looked at her for a long moment. "With all due respect, Ms. Cole, David Sullivan isn't the kind of man you can order to play. He'll agree, or he won't. But not because of an order." Victoria walked to the window. "Fine. Call him. Now. He's asleep. He had the night shift. I don't care. Wake him up. Have him here in an hour. In my office." Mr. Harris nodded and left. Victoria stood alone, gazing out the window at New York. The summer day was bright and sunny. People walked the streets, laughing, living. And she was about to ask a janitor to play at her engagement. Life had a taste for irony. David woke to the ringing of the phone. He picked it up without opening his eyes. "Sullivan speaking." "David, it's Mr. Harris. You need to come to the hotel. Right away. What happened? David sat up, rubbing his eyes. Miss Cole wants to see you. In an hour. In her office. His heart skipped a beat. Why? You'll see. Come, and David, be ready for anything. Mr. Harris hung up. An hour later, David stood at Victoria's office door and knocked. Come in, she said. He entered. Victoria sat behind her desk in a pale business suit, beautiful, cold, untouchable. Have a seat, Mr. Sullivan. He sat down, meeting her eyes. Mr. Harris told me about your past, she began. That you used to be a pianist. A famous one. I was. I have a problem, Victoria said, walking to the window. My engagement is in 2 days. 200 guests. The pianist cancelled. I can't find a replacement. Mr. Harris says you can play. I'm offering you to perform at my engagement. I'll pay you $1,000. Do you agree? David gave a faint smile. What about your promise? Victoria froze. What promise? A few days ago, you said, play Chopin, and I'll marry you. Her face went pale. That was a joke. Maybe for you, David said, standing up, but not for me. You've lost your mind. Victoria laughed sharply. Did you really think I'd marry a janitor? You gave your word. Mr. Harris heard it. Get out. Now. David nodded and turned toward the door, then stopped. You know, Miss Cole, I thought you were different. I've watched you for months. I saw not only coldness but loneliness. I thought there was still a real person behind the mask. But I was wrong. You're just an empty shell in an expensive suit. And he left. Victoria grabbed the phone and dialed. Fire Sullivan. Today. But 10 minutes later, she called again. Don't fire him. Tell him if he agrees to play at the engagement, I'll pay him $2,000. No conditions. That evening, Mr. Harris went to David's apartment and delivered the offer. David was silent for a long time before saying, I'll come. I'll play. But not for the money. Take it back. This isn't a job. It's something else. Mr. Harris nodded. Then come the day after tomorrow, at 7 p.m. I'll bring you to the ballroom. You can prepare. The next day, the hotel buzzed with activity. Decorations went up, tables were set. Victoria rushed around, checking every detail. Christina Bell followed close behind, pretending to be the perfect friend. Oliver showed up in the evening, drunk. He wrapped an arm around Victoria's waist. Ready to be my wife? Victoria pulled away, grimacing at the smell of alcohol. Oliver, go home. Sober up. He shrugged and staggered off. Christina watched from behind a column, smiling. Tomorrow, their game would begin. That night, Mrs. Helen Cole, Victoria's mother, arrived. They went into Victoria's office. Victoria, are you sure about this marriage? Her mother asked directly. Love is an illusion, Mom. Oliver is a good partner. You mean you understand each other, or you're using each other? Victoria turned away. Mrs. Cole sighed. By the way, Mrs. Cole said, Mr. Harris mentioned that tomorrow David Sullivan will be playing. Do you remember him? No. He played at my 50th birthday 10 years ago. A talented pianist. I cried listening to his music. Then tragedy struck, he lost his family. Lost everything. And now he works for you as a janitor. Victoria froze. What? Yes, sweetheart. The man who mops the floors in your hotel was once a star. Life's a strange thing, isn't it? Mrs. Cole left the room. Victoria picked up her phone and typed into the search bar, David Sullivan Pianist New York. The screen filled with articles. Photographs. A young, handsome man at the piano. Concerts. Awards. Then a headline from 5 years ago, renowned pianist David Sullivan loses family in tragic accident. Victoria read about his wife, Anna, and their daughter, Maggie. The phone slipped from her hands. What had she done? The day of the engagement arrived. The Grand Central Hotel's ballroom sparkled with light, white tablecloths, gold-plated cutlery, crystal glasses. Enormous bouquets of flowers. At the center of the room stood a black grand piano. Guests began arriving at 8 o'clock. The New York elite, businessmen, politicians, socialites. All in elegant suits and evening gowns. All with polished, practiced smiles. Victoria stood by the entrance in a stunning white dress. Beside her, Oliver, smug, champagne in hand. Christina fluttered between guests, playing the perfect friend. At 7:30, David entered through the staff entrance. Mr. Harris met him. "You ready?" David nodded. He wore a white shirt and jeans. No tuxedo. No pretense. "Come on," Mr. Harris began, "I'll get you into the hall before the guests arrive." "No," David stopped him. "I'll wait. Let everyone be there. I'll come in when the reception starts." The old man studied him carefully. "You want her to see you in front of everyone?" "Yes. Let her choose, with witnesses. Her word or her reputation." Mr. Harris slowly nodded. "Bold move. All right. Wait here. I'll call you when it's time." By 8, the ballroom was full. 200 guests. Laughter, chatter, clinking glasses. Victoria and Oliver stood at the center. He held her waist, she smiled at the crowd with a polished, empty smile. Mrs. Cole sat at a table in the front row, watching her daughter with quiet sadness. "Dear friends." Oliver raised his glass. "Tonight is a special night. Victoria Cole has agreed to be my wife." Applause. "Congratulations." Victoria smiled, but inside she felt nothing. "And now," Oliver continued, "we were supposed to have music. Unfortunately, the pianist fell ill. But Victoria found a replacement. Isn't that right, darling?" Victoria nodded, her heart pounding. "Yes. We'll have music." At that moment, the side door opened. Mr. Harris walked in, followed by David. The room fell silent. David crossed the hall in his white shirt and jeans. No tuxedo. No suit. Just himself. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Who is that? Why is he dressed like that? Is he really the pianist?" Victoria turned pale. Oliver frowned. David reached the piano and sat down. He looked straight at Victoria. "Miss Cole," his voice was quiet but carried through the hall, "a few days ago, you told me, play Chopin, and I'll marry you. I came to fulfill your request." The ballroom exploded. "What? Is he serious?" "That's the janitor." Oliver stepped forward, his face red with anger. "What the hell is going on?" "Victoria, who is this man?" Victoria stood frozen. Every eye was on her. Mr. Harris stepped forward. "I was a witness," he said loudly. "Miss Cole did say those words to David Sullivan. I heard them. 7 days ago. In this very ballroom." The room buzzed with shock. Christina covered her mouth, struggling to hide her smile. This was a scandal, Victoria's public humiliation. Mrs. Cole rose from her seat. "Victoria, is this true?" Victoria said nothing. She looked at David. He looked back, calm, without anger. "Just waiting." "Victoria!" Oliver barked. "Answer me. Did you promise this janitor you'd marry him?" Victoria slowly nodded. "Yes. I said those words." Gasps filled the hall. "But it was a joke," she added quickly. "I didn't mean." "A joke?" David interrupted. "So your word is just a joke?" Silence. Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it again. She had no words. "That's all I needed," David said, standing up. "I came. I made an offer. You refused. So your word means nothing." He turned to leave. "Wait," Victoria suddenly said. David stopped. Victoria walked up to the piano and stopped beside him. "You said you came to play. Then play. First. And afterward." "I'll answer." David met her eyes and nodded. He sat back down at the piano, placed his hands on the keys, and began to play. Chopin's Nocturne, Opus 9, No. 2. The first notes filled the hall, soft, tender, full of pain. The crowd fell silent. Every whisper vanished. David played. He played about loss, about love that had died, about pain that never fades, about the faint hope that still glows somewhere deep inside. He played his life. The guests stood motionless. Some closed their eyes. Others wept. Mrs. Cole sat with her eyes shut, tears streaming down her face. She remembered. 10 years ago, he had played the same way. And she had cried the same way. Laura stood by the doorway in her maid's uniform, watching. She cried too, covering her mouth with her hand. Christina stopped smiling. She stared at David in disbelief. This was real talent. Oliver stood frozen, his arms at his sides. The alcohol haze in his head cleared. He understood, he'd lost. This man had just stolen his evening. And Victoria, she stood beside the piano, watching David. Watching his face. His hands flying over the keys. And for the first time in years, she felt something inside, something alive. The music reached its climax. The final chords. Silence. David lifted his hands from the keys, slowly stood, and looked at Victoria. I played, he said quietly. Now it's your turn. The hall held its breath. Victoria looked at him, the man who had lost everything, who had fallen to the bottom, who had risen again, who had come here not for money or fame but for his word. And she understood, he was the only honest person in this room. Including herself. Victoria! Oliver barked. Don't you dare. This is madness. Victoria turned toward him. Oliver, the engagement is off. The room gasped. What? Oliver grabbed her hand. You're joking. No, Victoria pulled her hand free. I'm not marrying you. I don't want this marriage. You've lost your mind over this broke pianist? Victoria looked at David, then back at Oliver. No. I've just realized which one of you is real, and which one's an empty shell. Oliver's face turned crimson. You'll regret this. He spun around and started toward the exit. And then Mr. Harris stepped out from the crowd. Mr. Martin, he said loudly, before you go, allow me to say something, in front of everyone. Oliver stopped. What now? A week ago, I saw you kissing Miss Bell in the hallway on the 3rd floor. And it wasn't the first time. The hall erupted. Victoria slowly turned to Christina. She was white as a sheet. Christina? Victoria asked quietly. Is it true? Christina opened her mouth, closed it again, then turned and ran out of the room. Oliver stood there, fists clenched. Old fool, he hissed. I'll have you fired. I'll destroy this hotel. Try, Mr. Harris said calmly. But first, leave. You've already ruined enough air for everyone. Oliver stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The guests buzzed, whispers, glances, murmurs. Victoria stood in the center of the room, alone. No fiancé. No friend. No illusions. She looked at David. You were right. I am an empty shell. I've been living in lies and never noticed. David stayed silent. I won't marry you, Victoria said. Because you deserve better. You deserve someone real. And I don't even know who I am anymore. She turned and walked toward the exit. Mrs. Cole stood, wanting to stop her, but David shook his head. Let her go, he said softly. She needs time. Victoria left the hall. The guests stood in uneasy silence. David looked at Mr. Harris. Thank you. For everything. Thank you, the old man smiled. You gave these people a lesson in honesty. I hope at least one of them remembers it. David nodded and headed for the door. Laura stopped him there. David, she whispered, hugging him. You were incredible. I just played, Laura. No, she said, stepping back to meet his eyes. You did more. You showed them what real dignity is. David smiled. Come on. Let's get out of here. Coffee? As friends. Laura smiled through her tears. As friends. They walked out of the hotel into the warm summer night. Inside, the guests began to disperse, whispering about the unbelievable scandal. Mrs. Cole stayed behind, looking at the piano, at the now empty hall. And she smiled. At last, her daughter had seen the truth. Victoria stepped out of the hotel and just walked, she didn't know where. Away from those people, from their stares, from their whispers. The summer night was warm. New York shimmered with lights. She reached the Hudson River and stopped on the bridge, staring down at the water. Oliver had been cheating on her. With Christina. Her best friend. How long had it been? 6 months? A year? And she never even noticed. But David did. The janitor she'd thought was no one. He had seen her loneliness. He had told her the truth. You're just an empty shell in an expensive suit. He had been right. Completely right. Victoria began to cry, for the first time in 3 years. She cried for lost time, for the false life she had built, for the person she had become. Excuse me, a gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. An elderly woman stood beside her, offering a handkerchief. Here, she said. You're crying. Victoria took it. Something happened, dear? I just realized I've been living the wrong way all my life. The woman nodded. Realization is already the beginning. Just don't stop there. Start living right, while there's still time. And she walked away. Victoria called her mother. Mom? I'm fine. Just walking. Thinking. Sweetheart, come home. Don't be alone. Mom, I ruined everything. No, darling. You just saw the truth. That's not the end, it's the beginning of your real life. I don't know how to live for real, Mom. Then learn again. You still have time. And you still have me. Victoria smiled through her tears. I love you, Mom. And for the first time in years, she felt something like hope. David and Laura sat in an all-night cafe, sipping coffee. You really did it, David, Laura said with a half-smile. The whole city's going to be talking about this tomorrow. I just hope they at least appreciated the music. They did. You played like magic. David looked out the window. I was saying goodbye. To the past. To Anna and Maggie. To that life. To the hope for something impossible. Victoria? Yes. I realized I wasn't in love with her, I was in love with an illusion. With an image. I don't even know the real Victoria. Laura nodded. You know, David, that's good. It means you're ready to move on. And you? Laura smiled sadly. I've been ready for a long time. I was just waiting for you to be ready to let me go. David, I love you. But I'm tired of loving someone who can't love me back. I deserve a man who truly sees me. David squeezed her hand. You're right. And I know you'll find him. And you? What will you do? Go back to music. Try teaching again. Or playing in restaurants. We'll see. They stepped outside and hugged. Thank you, Laura. For everything. Thank you, David. Then they went their separate ways. The next day, all of New York was buzzing. Social media exploded with posts about the scandal, videos, photos. A janitor played the piano and ruined a millionaire's engagement. Journalists dug up his past. People argued. But most just listened to the recording of his performance, and cried. The music was honest. At the Grand Central Hotel, Victoria gathered her staff. I want to apologize, she said. For who I was, cold, arrogant. I was living wrong. But I want to change. Mr. Harris smiled. Ms. Cole, that's the best speech I've heard from you in 10 years. Victoria sent a message to David. Thank you. For the lesson. For the truth. For the music. I'm sorry for everything. I wish you happiness. David replied. Victoria, it's all right. We both got what we needed. You found truth. I found a reason to live again. Good luck. The day after the scandal, David received 3 job offers. One from the owner of the Lantern restaurant, another from a private music school, and a third from a wedding event organizer. He sat at home, staring at his phone, realizing life was giving him a second chance. A knock on the door. He opened it. Victoria stood there, no makeup, simple jeans and a white shirt, her hair loose, her eyes red from crying. May I come in? She asked softly. David hesitated for a second, then nodded and stepped aside. Victoria walked into the small room. It was modest, clean, honest. How did you find me? I asked Mr. Harris. He gave me the address. They stood in the middle of the room, silent. David, I came to apologize, Victoria said, meeting his eyes. For everything. For the mockery. The arrogance. For not keeping my word. For not seeing the person you are. Victoria. No, let me finish, she raised her hand. You were right. I was an empty shell. I lived in a world of lies and didn't see it. Oliver cheated on me with my best friend, and I was blind. I built a business and forgot what it means to be human. But you showed me the truth. Painful, harsh truth, but truth. David listened in silence. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she continued. I'm not asking for a second chance. I just want you to know, you changed me. In one night. With one performance. You made me see myself. And for that, I'm grateful. She turned to leave. Victoria, wait, David said. She turned back. I need to tell you the truth too, he said, taking a step toward her. I didn't love you. I loved an illusion. An image. An unreachable dream. I watched you for 6 months and built a version of you in my mind. But I never really knew the real you. Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. I know. But you know what? David moved closer. Last night, when you stood by the piano listening to me play, I saw you, for the first time. The real you. I saw you cry. I saw you struggle with yourself. I saw you choose to end that engagement. And do you know who I saw then? Victoria stayed silent. I saw a human being. A real one. Someone who can change. Someone who can admit mistakes. Someone who isn't perfect, but is honest. Victoria sobbed. David, I don't know who I am anymore. I'm 35 and I don't even know myself. Somewhere between money and status, I lost who I was. I need time. I need to find myself again. David took her hand. Then let's search together. I don't know who I am either. A pianist? A former janitor? A widower still living in the past? I'm searching too. Maybe we can help each other. She looked at him through her tears. Are you serious? After everything I did? I am. But not because you promised to marry me. Not out of pity. Because for the first time in 5 years, I see in someone, not an illusion, not a dream, but a real person I want to try with. Victoria hugged him tightly and began to cry on his shoulder. I'm so scared, David. Scared I'll ruin it. Scared I'll turn cold again. You won't, he said, stroking her hair. Because now you know the truth about yourself. And that's already half the journey. They stood there in that small apartment on the edge of New York, two lost souls who had found each other. A week later, Victoria invited David to the Grand Central Hotel. She led him to the ballroom. Remember this place? How could I forget? David smiled. I want to offer you something, Victoria said, walking toward the piano. Not a job. Not money. Just an idea. What idea? I want to open a free music school here, at the hotel. For kids who can't afford lessons. You'll teach. I'll fund it. Together we'll give children what once helped both of us survive, music. David stared at her in disbelief. Victoria, that's incredible. Will you do it? Of course I will. Victoria smiled, really smiled, for the first time in days. Then we'll start in a month. I already have a list of kids, 30 of them. From shelters, from poor families. They need a teacher. A real one. David hugged her. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for making me believe in myself, she replied. 3 months passed. The Grand Central Music School opened. Children came every day to learn piano, violin, guitar. David taught from morning till evening, glowing with happiness. Victoria often attended the classes, listening as the children played, and quietly crying with joy. She had found her purpose. Laura and Andrew Miller got married. Victoria hosted their wedding at the hotel, free of charge, as a gift. Thank you for being there for David when he needed a friend, Victoria told Laura at the reception. And thank you for making him happy again, Laura replied. They hugged, two women who had loved the same man, each in her own way. Both had let him go to where he truly belonged. Oliver tried to take revenge, posting angry rants online, filing lawsuits. But no one listened. His reputation was ruined. His business collapsed. Christina left him a month later, once she realized the money was gone. Mr. Harris kept working at the hotel, watching Victoria and David with quiet satisfaction. His plan had worked. Two people had found each other, and themselves. Mrs. Cole often came to the school. She sat through the lessons, listening as David taught the children, remembering that concert 10 years ago when he had first made her cry. One evening, after the children had gone home, David and Victoria stayed behind in the empty ballroom. Play something for me, she said. What should I play? Anything. Just play. David sat at the piano, thought for a moment, and began to play. Not Chopin, something of his own. An improvisation. He played about pain that fades, loss that lets go, hope that returns, and love that comes when you least expect it. Victoria stood beside him, listening, silently crying. When he finished, she sat beside him on the bench. David, I want to tell you something. I'm listening. I'm in love with you. David froze. Victoria. Not right away. Not suddenly. Gradually. Every day, watching you teach the children. Watching you smile. Watching you live again. I fell in love with the real you, not the illusion, not the image. The man. And I'm scared to say it because I don't know if you're ready. David took her hand. Victoria, I fell in love with you too. With the real you, the one who changes every day, who tries to become better, who found meaning in helping children. I'm ready. For the first time in 5 years, I'm ready to try again. Victoria looked into his eyes. So, we'll try? Together? Together. They kissed, gently, carefully, like two people afraid to make a mistake but ready to take the risk. Another 6 months passed. David and Victoria stood in the same ballroom. But this time, it wasn't an engagement. It was their wedding. Small. Simple. Only the closest friends and family. Mr. Harris, Mrs. Cole, Laura and Andrew. The children from the music school sat in the front rows, giggling. David stood by the piano in a plain suit. Victoria beside him, in a light, modest dress. Victoria, David said, taking her hands, a year ago you joked, play Chopin, and I'll marry you. I played. But you didn't marry me. And that was right, because back then, neither of us was ready. Guests smiled. Some wiped away tears. Today, I played again, David continued. But not for a promise. Not for a deal. I played because I love you, the real you. And I'm ready to stand by your side for the rest of my life. Victoria was crying. David, a year ago I was just an empty shell. You broke that shell, painfully, harshly, but the right way. You taught me how to be human again. And I love you for that. Not for your talent. Not for your music. But for who you are. They kissed under the applause of their guests. The children from the Grand Central Music School stood up and began to play. A simple, slightly off-key, but deeply moving melody. Mr. Harris wiped his eyes. Now that's a real wedding, he whispered to Mrs. Cole. Yes, she agreed softly. No lies. No calculations. Just love. That evening, after everyone had gone home, David and Victoria stayed alone in the ballroom. So, Mrs. Sullivan, David smiled, ready for a new life? Ready, Mr. Sullivan. What about you? More than ready. They embraced, standing in the middle of the empty hall where it had all begun a year ago. You know what I'm thinking? Victoria asked. What? That sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself, and to find someone who loves the real you. David kissed her forehead. You're right. And I'm glad I found you, the real you. So am I. They walked out of the hotel under the starry sky. New York shimmered with lights. The summer night smelled like freedom and happiness. Somewhere across the city, Laura and Andrew were sitting in their kitchen, sharing tea. Mr. Harris was reading in his apartment. Mrs. Cole looked through old photographs and smiled. Life went on, for each of them. Honest. True. Real. If this story touched your heart and you want to help us keep sharing stories like this, click the Super Thanks button, the small heart with the $sign below the video. Every time you do, you help us create stories that inspire and remind people of the power of dignity. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Tell us in the comments which moment moved you the most, maybe the performance at the engagement? Or the scene when Victoria came to apologize to David? Or their wedding? Subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next stories. Hit like if you believe that real love comes when you stop pretending and start living honestly. And before you go, watch the story appearing on your screen. We're sure it will move you too. Remember, sometimes the greatest love begins with the greatest truth. And it's never too late to become real. See you in the next story.